The cold of space was deeper than anything Captain Aaron Hale had felt before. His ship, the Starbound, floated near a forgotten star system, far beyond the usual trade routes. The emergency lights flickered weakly in the empty corridors, casting long shadows across the metal floors. Hale ran his hand along the console, trying to make sense of the strange readings on the scanner. Something warm. In a place that should have been dead. He frowned. Nothing lived here, not for centuries. Hale adjusted the controls, moving the ship closer to the source. Outside the viewport, a jagged asteroid hung in the void like a frozen relic. Its surface was pitted and cracked, a graveyard for ancient mining stations. Yet the readings persisted. Warmth. Small, weak, and alive. Hale's heart beat faster. He had seen strange things in space, but life this close to extinction was rare. He knew it could be dangerous. But he also knew curiosity was part of being human. He suited up and entered the airlock. The vacuum outside hissed as the outer door opened. Floating among broken chunks of rock and metal, Hale could see the source of the heat. At first he thought it was a small alien drone, but then he froze. A tiny creature crouched in the shadows. Its scales shimmered faintly under the starlight, pale and cracked, and its eyes, large, liquid, and intelligent, locked on him. The hatchling was no bigger than a human child. It trembled, shivering against the cold, and made a soft, almost human-like sound. "My father once flew one like this," it whispered. The words were broken, strange, and impossible. Yet the voice carried something familiar. Hope, fear, loneliness. Hale stepped closer, his own breath quickening. He had read about dragons in old Earth myths, but he had never believed. Not in the cold dark of space, not in a galaxy where science ruled. And yet here it was, speaking like a child remembering home. The hatchling flinched and tried to curl itself smaller, its wings folded awkwardly against its back. Hale noticed the jagged scars along its tiny body. It had survived something terrible. He wanted to reach out, but he paused. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, and the creature might flee, or worse, attack. But it did not. It just looked at him, eyes wide and full of silent questions. Hale knelt slowly, lowering his visor so his face could be seen. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon's ears flicked, almost like a child recognizing kindness. It took a cautious step forward, then another. Hale extended his hand. The hatchling sniffed it carefully, then nuzzled briefly before retreating again. Its movements were clumsy, almost human, as though it was learning how to trust. Hale's stomach twisted with a mixture of awe and responsibility. How could such a fragile creature survive here alone? And why did it know humans, or something like humans, so well? The emergency lights inside the ship flickered, and Hale knew he had to act fast. Space patrols often scan these old systems for unauthorized activity. If they found a dragon, the consequences could be severe. Hale gently lifted the hatchling, feeling the tiny weight of life in his arms. The scales were warm under his gloves, pulsing faintly with the creature's weak heartbeat. The hatchling let out a soft, almost purring sound and rested its head on Hale's chest. Back on the ship, Hale carried it to the small medical bay. He laid the hatchling on a soft blanket, adjusting the thermal regulators to keep it warm. He watched as the creature's eyes blinked slowly, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. Every breath it took seemed measured, cautious, as though it was calculating whether this human could be trusted. Hale couldn't help but feel a connection forming. He had saved many lives in his career, but never one like this. Not a life so fragile, yet so full of quiet strength. The hatchling began to move, its wings twitching slightly. Hale watched in fascination. They were small and uneven, but strong in a way that reminded him of the way children struggled to stand before learning to walk. Its gaze met his again, and he thought he saw recognition, almost like it remembered something from a long time ago. A bond, ancient and unspoken, seemed to spark between them. Hale sat beside the blanket, unsure what to do next. He had no idea where this hatchling came from or why it survived alone in the cold void of space. And yet, despite the danger, he knew he could not leave it behind. Something about the way it whispered those words, about its father and the ship, told him that this was a story bigger than any protocol, any mission, or any rule. It was about trust. And perhaps, in some strange way, it was about hope. The hatchling stirred and made a small, hesitant noise. Hale leaned closer. "We'll figure this out," he said gently. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in centuries, the asteroid felt less like a graveyard and more like a starting point. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched endlessly, indifferent to the tiny lives aboard the Starbound. Yet inside, a human and a dragon hatchling shared a fragile warmth, a bond forming against the emptiness of space. And in that silence, Hale realized that something extraordinary was beginning. Something that neither humans nor dragons could have imagined. An adventure that might change both of their worlds forever. The hatchling's small, glowing eyes blinked up at him once more. It whispered again, softer this time, almost like a question, "Will you help me?" Hale smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. "I will." And with that promise, the cold silence of space felt just a little warmer. Hale stayed by the hatchling's side for hours, watching it breathe. Its chest rose and fell slowly, each breath a small victory against the cold of space. He noticed details he had never imagined. Tiny claws that gleamed like polished stone, scales that reflected light like faint stars, and eyes so deep that they seemed to hold centuries of memory. The creature was fragile, but there was a strength hidden beneath its trembling body. Hale had seen courage in soldiers, explorers and pilots, but never like this. The hatchling, which Hale decided to call Kyrix, finally stretched its wings. They were small and uneven, but he could see the power that could grow from them. Kyrix tilted its head, looking around the medical bay with curiosity. Everything was strange to him, the soft blankets, the lights, even the smell of the ship. Hale offered a small piece of rations, and Kyrix took it cautiously, tasting slowly as though learning what food could mean in this world. Hale wanted to know where Kyrix came from. "Were you abandoned?" he asked softly, though he knew the answer would not be simple. Kyrix blinked, then whispered, "My family, gone. The galaxy forgot us." The words were soft, almost like a sigh, but Hale felt their weight. Dragons, Hale realized, were not just creatures of legend. They had lived among the stars, but something had wiped them from memory. Kyrix was the last of a lost line. The more Hale looked at him, the more he understood that Kyrix carried history in his small body. Scars marked his tiny limbs, each one telling a story of survival. He must have wandered for a long time, hiding in wrecked ships and dead stations. He had seen danger, hunger, and loneliness. Yet there was something unbroken in him, a quiet dignity that even humans sometimes lost after long years of hardship. Hale felt a pang of respect and sorrow. The galaxy had abandoned him, but he was still alive. Kyrix's voice broke the silence again. "Humans fly with dragons, like my father?" He stared at Hale with wide, hopeful eyes. The hatchling did not fully understand what it was saying, but it remembered the trust between species long gone. Hale sat down next to the blanket, letting Kyrix climb onto his lap. The dragon's warmth seeped through his gloves, and Hale could feel a heartbeat that was tiny but strong. It was not just life, it was resilience. Hale thought about what the galaxy had done. Dragons were no longer seen as allies, only as stories, warnings, or weapons. Ancient records mentioned them briefly, but no one in the current fleets had ever met one. Kyrix was proof that dragons had once been part of the stars, part of the civilizations that had built fleets, explored galaxies, and trusted humans. He realized that protecting Kyrix was more than an act of kindness, it was a duty to remember, to preserve what had been erased. The crew of the Starbound gathered slowly. Some watched from a distance, unsure if this creature was a friend or a threat. Hale explained what he knew, careful not to exaggerate. "This is no ordinary creature," he said. "It remembers. It knows humans. It survived when nothing else did. We have a choice, help it or let the galaxy erase it completely." Some crew members nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. Others were hesitant, still bound by rules that treated dragons as dangerous unknowns. Hale knew he would have to make decisions that no captain had faced in generations. Kyrix explored the small cabin at his own pace, touching instruments and panels with delicate claws. He chirped softly, discovering that some buttons moved, some lights changed. Hale watched, smiling quietly. There was intelligence here and curiosity. Kyrix was learning quickly, and not just about the ship. He was learning trust. Hale offered his hand again, and Kyrix nuzzled it carefully. That simple act made Hale feel a connection he had never experienced in space. Hours passed, and the emergency lights continued to flicker. Hale set up a small corner for Kyrix, a nest of blankets and cushions. He noticed that Kyrix seemed to relax in the warmth, curling into a tiny ball but keeping one eye on Hale. Every so often, Kyrix whispered small fragments of memory, stories of flight, of stars reflected in scales, of companions who had vanished. Hale listened, understanding little by little that Kyrix carried not just survival but history. The captain knew they could not stay hidden forever. Patrols would scan the sector, and any anomaly could bring questions, inspections, and danger. Hale looked at Kyrix, who was dozing but still alert. He made a promise silently, one he would keep no matter the cost. He would protect this small dragon, not as a weapon or a curiosity, but as a life that deserved respect. The galaxy had forgotten, but he would not. Later, Hale adjusted the ship's course to a nearby nebula, a place rarely visited and perfect for hiding. Kirix stirred and chirped softly, stretching his wings. Hale reached out, letting the tiny claws rest on his hand. There was an understanding forming, quiet but strong. The hatchling was no longer alone, and Hale realized that in saving him, he had begun something greater. This small, abandoned creature could remind the galaxy of what it had lost, if given the chance. Kirix's soft gaze met Hale's. "Will you take me where I belong?" he asked. The words were simple, but they carried a lifetime of hope and sorrow. Hale smiled, feeling a mix of pride and determination. "Yes," he said. "We'll find your place again. Together." Outside the ship, stars stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent. But inside, a small dragon and a human captain shared warmth, trust, and the quiet beginnings of a bond that could change the galaxy. Kirix's small claws rested on Hale's arm, and for the first time in a long time he felt safe. Not because the stars had changed, but because someone had finally chosen to care. And in that silence, the galaxy waited, unaware that a creature it had abandoned was about to remind everyone what courage and hope could look like. Captain Hale spent the next hours planning their next move. Kirix stayed close, exploring the corners of the ship but always returning to Hale when unsure. The hatchling's small wings twitched with every sound, as if he were ready to flee at any moment. Hale understood that Kirix had been hurt before, abandoned by a galaxy that had forgotten him. The bond between them had grown quickly, but trust was still fragile. Hale needed to protect him, and that meant careful choices. Suddenly, the ship's sensors beeped sharply. Hale rushed to the console. On the display, a patrol fleet had entered the system. They were sleek, uniform, and efficient, machines of order designed to catch anomalies. Kirix froze beside him, small claws gripping the blanket. Hale could see the fear in his eyes. These patrols did not care about kindness or history. They only saw rules, violations, and the unknown. If they discovered Kirix, he would be taken. No questions asked. Hale clenched his fists. He knew the law. No one could harbor a dragon. They were considered dangerous, even extinct, and any living one would be confiscated for study. Some captains might have obeyed without question. But Hale was not like most captains. He looked at Kirix and remembered the warmth of his scales, the gentle trust in his eyes, the soft whisper of memories that spoke of family and loss. The choice was clear, even if it was dangerous. He grabbed a datapad and set the ship's course away from the patrol fleet. The Starbound's engines hummed as they left the main route. Kirix tilted his head, watching the monitors. Hale knelt beside him. "They won't understand you," he said softly. "But I do. And I won't let anyone take you from me." Kirix blinked slowly, nuzzling his small head against Hale's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it spoke more than words ever could. It was trust. The patrol fleet contacted them, voice cold and sharp over the intercom. "Captain Hale, identify yourself. You are carrying an illegal life form. Surrender it immediately." Hale paused, looking at the blinking red lights. He took a deep breath. He knew that defying them meant consequences, possibly losing his ship, rank, or freedom. But Kirix was not a threat. He was a child, a survivor, and a reminder that the galaxy had forgotten life beyond its own rules. Hale pressed a button, cutting off the patrol signal. Kirix made a small, worried noise. Hale smiled faintly. "Don't worry," he said. "They cannot take you. Not while I am here." The hatchling flinched at the word "here," as if unsure what it meant to have protection. Hale reached out and touched his forehead gently, a human gesture of reassurance. Kirix tilted his head, then curled closer to Hale, his trust growing with each quiet breath. As the ship drifted into a nearby nebula, the lights dimmed, and the stars outside seemed to blur into clouds of color. Hale looked at the small creature beside him. He realized that dragons were not like other species. They did not bond through fear or control. They bonded through respect and trust, something humans often struggle to understand. And yet, in this moment it felt natural. Hale had chosen to trust Kirix, and Kirix had chosen to trust him. Hours passed as they traveled through the nebula. Kirix began to move more freely, exploring the ship with cautious curiosity. He chirped softly at strange panels, tapping buttons with tiny claws. Hale watched, fascinated. The hatchling's intelligence was obvious. He remembered things, learned quickly, and even seemed to understand the ship's movements in a way that was remarkable for one so small. Hale realized that Kirix might know more about space travel than most humans on board. Night fell in the ship's artificial cycle, and Hale prepared a small meal for Kirix. The hatchling ate slowly, tasting each bite carefully, his eyes never leaving Hale. The bond deepened with every small gesture, the sharing of warmth, the passing of food, the quiet understanding that no one else in the galaxy cared enough to protect him. Hale felt a strange pride tempered by responsibility. This small creature, abandoned and alone, now relied entirely on him. Later, Hale ran simulations for the patrol fleet. They would be looking for anomalies, scanning for irregular heat signatures and life readings. He adjusted every sensor, every shield, and every signal to hide Kirix. It was tedious work but necessary. The hatchling watched, tilting his head in curiosity. Hale chuckled softly. "One day maybe you can help me with this," he said. Kirix blinked slowly as if he already understood. The captain thought about the galaxy beyond the nebula. So many humans obeyed rules without question, seeing only orders and protocols. But in the cold void, with a small dragon in his arms, Hale understood something important. Rules were not always right. Sometimes courage meant breaking them. Sometimes humanity meant choosing compassion over obedience. Kirix had survived alone because the galaxy had not cared. Hale would make sure it did now. As the ship drifted further into hidden space, Kirix curled up on Hale's lap, small wings stretching gently. Hale stroked his scales, feeling the faint pulse of life and trust. The patrol fleet would search, question, and perhaps condemn him. But Hale did not care. For the first time in his career, he understood the meaning of choice. Not the choice of orders or missions or medals. The choice of doing what was right even when it was dangerous. Kirix looked up, eyes bright in the dim light. "You stay with me?" he asked softly. His voice was weak, almost unsure, but the meaning was clear. Hale smiled and nodded. "Always," he said. "I will not leave you." We faced the stars together. Outside, the nebula swirled, hiding them from view. Inside, a human and a dragon hatchling shared warmth, trust, and hope. One choice had been made and it would change everything. The galaxy would soon learn that one small act of courage could ripple farther than anyone imagined. And in that quiet, suspended moment, Hale realized that the real journey was only beginning, not for the ship, not for the crew, but for the life he had chosen to protect. Kirix was no longer abandoned. He was home, and together they would face whatever the galaxy had forgotten. The starbound drifted quietly through the nebula, its lights dimmed to avoid detection. Captain Hale watched the swirling colors outside the viewport, but his attention kept returning to Kirix. The hatchling had been unusually quiet for the past hour, his eyes fixed on the ship's control panels. Hale noticed his small claws tracing the edges of buttons and levers, moving with surprising precision. It was almost as if the ship itself recognized him. Kirix tilted his head and whispered softly, "My father flew like this." The words were a memory, a fragment of something long lost. Hale frowned, realizing that the hatchling was not just recalling images, he was awakening systems the galaxy had forgotten. Ancient controls blinked faintly under Kirix's touch, responding in ways modern humans could not understand. Lights flickered, engines hummed, and a subtle energy pulsed through the ship, quiet but powerful. Hale stepped closer, astonished. "What are you doing?" he asked. Kirix did not answer, only continued to touch the controls with delicate, precise movements. The ship seemed to respond, almost as if it recognized him. Monitors lit up with data streams no one aboard the starbound had ever seen. The ancient technology, thought to be useless and broken, was alive again in the presence of this tiny dragon. The crew watched from behind the glass panels, eyes wide. Some whispered among themselves, unsure whether this was science or magic. Hale understood better than anyone. Dragons had never been simple creatures. They remembered. They connected. Kirix's father had flown this kind of ship long ago, and somehow the memory lived on in the hatchling. This small creature was awakening the past, and in doing so, was showing the galaxy a power it had forgotten. Hale moved to the pilot's console. Kirix chirped softly and nudged his hand away as if to say, "I know what to do." Hesitant but trusting, Hale let the hatchling take the lead. The engines roared quietly, performing maneuvers Hale had never thought possible. The ship's shields shimmered with an unusual energy pattern, bending light and sensing the nebula in ways no human sensors could match. Hale's breath caught. He realized that the galaxy's lost technology was not useless. It had been waiting for someone who could earn trust, someone dragons could believe in. Kirix's wings fluttered with excitement as he moved from one console to another. His small body radiated confidence, and Hale felt a mixture of awe and wonder. The hatchling had awakened something more than the ship. He had awakened hope, curiosity, and the reminder that humans were not alone in the universe. Other species had forgotten what trust between dragons and humans could achieve, but Kyrix remembered. And now Hale could see it too. The nebula outside swirled faster as the starbound systems adjusted. Lights blinked in sequences that looked like patterns from an ancient code. Hale reached for the controls but stopped. Kyrix chirped insistently, nudging Hale's hand back. Hesitant, Hale let him continue. The ship responded, lifting smoothly, moving as if it had wings of its own. The patrol fleet that had been following them would never have imagined a maneuver like this. Not in 1,000 years. The crew gathered closer, some touching the consoles, others watching the displays. Data flowed in streams of color and light. Hale realized that this was not just a revival of old technology, it was a lesson. Dragons had worked with humans long ago, and their combined memory had created wonders that the galaxy now considered impossible. Kyrix was small, but the knowledge he carried was immense. He was a bridge between the past and the present, between what the galaxy had forgotten and what it could still achieve. Hale felt a surge of determination. The patrol fleet could be anywhere, but right now it did not matter. What mattered was that Kyrix had awakened the ship. He had reminded humans of the bond that once existed, a bond built on trust, not fear. Hale leaned down and whispered to the hatchling, "You are more than just a survivor. You are a teacher." Kyrix tilted his head, eyes wide, absorbing the words, understanding in his own small way. Hours passed, but the ship seemed to move effortlessly through the nebula, guided by Kyrix's instinct and memory. The crew grew more confident, letting the hatchling navigate sections of the ship. Each time Kyrix touched a console, lights blinked and systems came alive. Engines hummed, shields adjusted, and the ship moved as if it had grown wings. Hale watched quietly, understanding that this moment would be remembered long after their mission ended. The galaxy had been blind to dragons for centuries, but now, it could no longer ignore them. Kyrix paused for a moment, curling on a soft blanket near the control deck. His small chest rose and fell as he rested, his eyes closing briefly. Hale leaned over, brushing a hand along his scales. "You have done more than survive," he said softly. "You've reminded the galaxy of what we lost." The hatchling blinked slowly, almost smiling in his quiet way. It was a moment of calm in a universe that often forgot the value of life, trust, and memory. The ship glided into open space beyond the nebula, engines quiet, lights dim. Hale stood at the viewport, looking at the stars stretched across the endless darkness. Kyrix had awakened something more than a ship. He had awakened a possibility, that humans and dragons, together, could be more than the galaxy expected. Hale realized that the small hatchling in his arms carried not just memories, but power, hope, and the courage to change everything. Kyrix chirped softly, looking up at Hale with bright, trusting eyes. "The stars, remember us," he whispered. Hale nodded. "And now so will the galaxy." Outside nothing seemed to notice. Stars burned cold and distant, yet inside the starbound, a small dragon and a human captain had begun something extraordinary. One hatchling's memory had awakened the stars and in doing so reminded everyone on board, and perhaps the universe, that life, trust, and courage could never truly be forgotten. And in that quiet, glowing control deck, Hale understood that the journey ahead would be dangerous, uncertain, and long. But he also understood that with Kyrix by his side, they could face anything. The galaxy had forgotten, but together they could remind it what hope really looked like. The starbound moved through open space, quiet and steady. Captain Hale sat beside Kyrix, watching the hatchling stretch his small wings. They were growing stronger with every hour, tiny muscles flexing under fragile scales. Hale smiled, realizing that this little creature, once homeless and abandoned, now had a chance to fly again, not just through space but toward a life he had never thought possible. Kyrix chirped softly, tilting his head toward the viewport. "Will we find home?" he asked. His voice was small, hesitant, full of hope that had been missing for so long. Hale reached down, brushing his hand across the hatchling's scales. "We will," he said firmly. "We'll find a place where you belong. Somewhere the galaxy cannot forget you." Kyrix blinked, curling closer to Hale, trusting him completely. The crew watched quietly. None had ever encountered a dragon before, much less one capable of awakening ancient technology with mere memory. They were in awe of the bond forming between human and dragon, a connection neither science nor fear could explain. Hale realized that what they were witnessing was rare, a partnership built on respect, trust, and courage. This was not just survival, it was something extraordinary. Hale began preparing the ship for a long journey. Supplies were limited, but he had learned from experience that determination often mattered more than provisions. Kirix explored the deck, tapping panels and nudging levers as if he remembered what each did. The hatchling's curiosity was insatiable, and every movement seemed to awaken more of the ship's hidden abilities. The older humans aboard watched silently, understanding that they were no longer just crew, they were witnesses to history. As they traveled through empty sectors of space, Hale sent a quiet message to nearby star systems. He did not ask for aid. He did not announce the presence of a dragon. Instead, he left a simple signal: life survives. Trust matters. It was a small gesture, but Hale hoped it would reach someone willing to see the truth. Kirix chirped in approval, nudging the console as if agreeing that the message was right. Days passed. Kirix grew more confident, moving around the ship without hesitation. Hale began teaching him simple things like adjusting minor controls and understanding the displays. The hatchling absorbed every lesson, often faster than the crew expected. Hale realized that dragons were not just survivors, they were learners, teachers, and partners. Kirix had survived alone, but now he was part of something bigger. One evening, Hale looked out the viewport at a distant cluster of stars. "We need a place to land," he said softly. "A place where you can be safe, Kirix. Somewhere the galaxy cannot take you from me." Kirix chirped in response, his wings flaring slightly. Hale smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's thermal regulators. This was hope, simple and quiet, growing steadily in the vacuum of space. Hale guided the ship to a hidden asteroid field, one rarely charted. The rocks moved slowly, creating natural cover from patrols and scanners. He set the starbound down carefully on a flat, open surface. Kirix hopped off the blanket, testing the solid ground with small, tentative steps. He looked back at Hale, chirping softly as if asking permission. Hale nodded. "Go ahead," he said. "This is your place." The hatchling spread his wings fully for the first time, small muscles trembling as they stretched. Hale held his breath. Kirix flapped once, twice, and lifted slightly off the ground. The movement was awkward but determined. He hovered, then landed, then tried again. Hale felt a surge of pride. This was more than flight. It was freedom. It was the start of a life that had seemed impossible just days before. The crew watched silently, some wiping tears from their eyes. No one had expected to see such courage, such resilience, from a creature so small. Hale knelt beside Kirix as he tried again, offering steady hands and quiet encouragement. "You can do it," Hale whispered. "You're strong. You belong." The hatchling chirped, flapping with renewed energy and lifted higher than before. Hale laughed softly. This small, abandoned dragon was flying again. Kirix circled the asteroid field, wings steady now, confidence growing with each pass. He landed briefly beside Hale, nuzzling his hand before lifting off again. Hale realized that this was more than a game or practice. It was a promise fulfilled. He had saved Kirix, but in doing so he had given the hatchling a future. A home. A place where he could grow without fear. Hale stood at the viewport watching Kirix soar. He knew the galaxy would not remain indifferent forever. Others would discover the presence of dragons and questions would follow. But for now they were safe. Kirix had a home again, and Hale had done what no one else could. He had chosen kindness, trust, and courage over rules and fear. That choice had changed everything. Night passed quietly. The asteroid field glowed faintly in the reflected light of distant stars. Kirix curled up beside Hale on a blanket, tiny wings tucked close. Hale stroked his scales, feeling the warmth and steady heartbeat beneath his hand. "We did it," he whispered softly. "You have a home. You are safe. And together we can face anything." Kirix chirped in response, a small, contented sound that filled the quiet ship with life. As Hale looked out at the endless stars, he realized that the journey had been about more than survival. It had been about hope, trust, and the courage to act when the galaxy had forgotten what it meant to care. Kirix was no longer just a dragon hatchling. He was a symbol of possibility, proof that even in the cold void of space, warmth could exist. The starbound rested quietly in the asteroid field. Inside, a human captain and a dragon hatchling shared silence, warmth, and a sense of home. Kirix lifted off briefly, testing the air one last time before landing gently. Hale smiled. For the first time in a long time, both of them felt secure. The galaxy was vast and unknown, but here in this small hidden place, a home had been rebuilt. Kirix chirped softly, curling against Hale's chest. "Home now?" he asked. Hale nodded, holding him close. "Yes," he said. "Home." Outside, stars burned distant and cold, but inside, life, trust, and courage had made a small corner of the universe warm again. A home that could fly.